And we are live. It is another great day for a little Cribble TV. It's Ed Bailey from Cribble, a technical evangelist. I'm here today with Max Weber. Max Weber is a noted senior detection engineer. We're going to talk about the state of being a detection engineer in today's info security landscape. We're also going to talk about how Max is solving his problems with Cribble Stream. So it's going to be a great show. Max, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Ed. How about yourself?
It's great. Tell me, so where are you?
I'm down in Newport Beach, Orange County. Nice and sunny out.
That's great. Yeah, it's awesome. And we're fall starting to hit in Atlanta. Nice weather. Starting to see the leaves turn. It's a great time of the year.
Oh yeah.
Are you a big sports fan?
Somewhat. I don't follow it as closely as I'd like to, though.
That's true. I mean, it must be hard. I mean, it's just I guess college football is not as big. It's a big thing here, though.
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, but I'm say thank you for being here. I always want to hear from people like you. We're here to talk about, here's your chance to talk about what's the state of info security, what's the state of being a detection engineer. Want to ask you about, what bothers you, what are the struggles, what do you want to see get better?
Totally. Yeah. So I mean, just to start off right off, if I want to see anything get better, it's just pricing of log storage. That's probably the biggest one, just because that seems to be the biggest problem when it comes to maturing a detection engineering position and just helping the organization grow. Because if you don't have the logs to start, you can't detect them. So you have to be able to retain those logs and be able to reference and just stuff like that. So that's probably the biggest one right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, I think SIM architecture is a huge issue. I mean, traditional one size fits all SIM architecture is just not working anymore. And I think it's very important, just like you're talking about. You have the ability to, there's a old joke about I got a severe case of log it all, but then how do you afford to log it all? And that's the thing. It's like, and I think that's a big deal. So tell me, can you share a little bit about your SIM architecture and how y'all are managing, the fine line between too much data and too little?
Yeah, totally. So we have one of the big 3 SIMs on-prem for us. From there, we're feeding a lot of our logs in, like firewall, right? All your machine logs, all your different SaaS logs, all that type of stuff. When it comes to cutting cost, I guess is the best way to say it, is something we've used Cribble actually, and it's been a tremendous help on, is being able to say for firewall logs that come in as a CSV, a lot of those fields are nonsense, right? You don't need some of these source NAT ranges. And some people do, but for what are most operations teams, you just kind of need that source IP, destination IP, ports, protocols, that type of stuff to get a big enough picture to build those detections on. So Cribble's been a huge help with being able to remove a plethora of those fields and cut down on our logging policies, retention, an insane amount, over 40% decrease in total log usage, which has just been huge for us.
That's awesome. So your main strategy is basically optimization.
Yeah, exactly. Optimization and then enrichment. So while we're pulling fields out, we're also having a couple of things where we're reaching out to third-party providers for IP intel, or if you want to go ahead and do it, if you have a threat intel provider, anyone that stores historical data, you could go ahead and reach out to and then attach those logs while you're removing. So you could do 2 birds with 1 stone kind of thing.
That's awesome. I think that's always really important, where you're optimizing for getting rid of what you don't want, but you add in a little bit more right data to make that data even more valuable. I mean, I think I think it's the way. Do you think future wise that you'll be able to kind of diversify and say, I'm going to put our raw data into a data lake, and then that way you're splitting your analytics away from your detection engine?
Yeah, totally. We could have a AWS storage or Azure storage bucket or whatever you want to store it in. But yeah, totally. Having that full raw log backup would be huge. I mean, just for compliance, threat hunting, say you want to look for this new field that you weren't originally logging, you have that historical data to go look back. That would be huge. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So you think but future wise, you think that could be part of your future strategy because I see that all the time where, you have, I think it's just too much to ask from a traditional SIM vendor to do your analytics, your retention, do your detections, do your case management, do everything. And that's why by splitting it up and say, hey, we're going to focus our SIM on detections, our data lake on our analytics, and just give you that flexibility to have a best of breed stack can be very powerful.
Oh yeah, totally. I could fully see that, and I'm on board. Agreed. Yeah, I could see that in our future. I mean, like you just said, breaking it apart just gives you more flexibility with everything. So totally.
Yeah, and I think that that's a big trend. So tell me a little bit about detections. What are when you're writing detection, what are the things that are the biggest obstacles to having successful, sustainable detections in your environment?
Sustainable detections. I guess you want to look for high fidelity. You don't want to be too generic. This is going to be a lot of words at once that may not make the most sense, but you have to be generic enough to catch deviations, but then you
Right.
can't be so generic where you're just like you said, a case of log me all, and you're logging everything or flagging everything.
Right.
Um, I would say the biggest thing for that is just making sure you have the right type of data and like automation behind it. So when it comes to like enrichment and stuff like that, I'm a big proponent of like kind of, I guess, dynamic detections is what you could call it, where it's
Right.
looking for more for a generic sense of something to alert on. And then from there, you can run enrichments against it to give that higher fidelity, because you could have logic. You can enrich it from an IP source, find out this IP is a known VPN hoster, and then from there you can flag, like raise the severity of that alert maybe because it's a VPN provider or something like that. So it's being generic and flexible enough where it can detect deviations but still be cast a wide enough net that it's not catching the whole sea kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. How do you handle bad data, ugly data?
Bad data or ugly data, I guess. What do you mean by that? For like,
Well, I mean, so for example, like a popular source like Sysmon, for example, it's a big chunk of ugly XML that can be hard to run detections against, because it's a searching that data has a lot of overhead. And so, I mean, do you try to transform it? Do you try to just split it out? Do you try to just capture only the fields you care about?
yeah, I would say mainly capture the only the fields you care about. Kind of have like a parser in the middle ground that kind of can just run as like a batch job. So as they come in on the fly, and yeah, just try to parse out like the fields that you're looking for, right? I mean, as a building detections, you know what you're looking for, so you can kind of cater that towards what you're pulling out when you're designing maybe the logging architecture, if you have a chance to get your feet involved in that. It kind of comes back to just making sure that you have it cleaned up from like the sysmon config basically, and trying to get as pointed as you can, again, with it being generic enough still to catch
Sure.
deviations.
Totally. I mean, do you ever try to normalize data? So say you take firewall data from multiple firewall providers. I mean, do you have multiple firewall providers?
Yeah, so in previous companies, I've worked with that for sure. Yeah, previous roles. And yeah, normalizing, I mean, is the biggest thing. You need that one log aggregator in the middle that can go
Right.
ahead and parse, rename, all that type of stuff. And honestly, Cribble is capable, like for sure, probably able to do that. Just with like the grabbing and renaming of fields, parsing, serializing, all that type of stuff, could definitely play a fact in that.
Yeah, and I think that would probably make your detections easier because you could write your detections for the data and not for the vendor, or maybe. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep. So do you see any future in doing data engineering and also driving for, say, behavior based detections instead of just detecting on events, for example?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think behavior based is kind of the future, if it's not already. Just that next evolution, because now we can take multiple fields, multiple like events that are happening, correlating them into like a known behavior or something, like whatever you want to call it, like a tactic. And then from there, have these higher fidelity alerts, because sure, someone opening CMD is suspicious, whatever, in a certain context. But if it opens CMD, runs this, and then does this, that's a lot higher fidelity than the
Right.
accidental opening of command prompt or something like that, right? So it's going to help reduce that alert fatigue with analysts as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because I could see a lot, especially the obfuscation and the ability to obfuscate commands is seemingly unlimited. And so
Yeah.
that's why I think that just trying to account for every different possible variation of a command, where it's just that the behavior based aspect of, are you accessing another account? Are you trying to break out of your shell? All those different things. It just seems like the way of the future. So what do you think are the big obstacles to get to that point?
I would say that, I mean, honestly, it might be cliche, but the biggest one I think is like logging. And just
Mhm.
because people are logging costs so much and it's so expensive to get all the logs that you could possibly want, because you only need them actually 1% of the time for the breach you're investigating or X, Y, and Z. So it's hard to justify it. So I understand. But logging is just kind of the biggest thing, because organizations are going to have to make tough decisions on what they don't log and what they do log. And within those are going to be things that are too many logs, like accidentally logging a permissive, like an all deny policy on a firewall, like that's just going to be noise. And so I think that kind of comes down to being one of the biggest barriers, just because you have to be logging multiple sources if you want to be able to correlate those behaviors kind of thing.
It sounds like you almost have to have work in data engineering as a prerequisite to detection engineering.
Yeah, kind of, especially with all the manipulation of data and like the variance that you're going to have that way to normalize and work with big data and small data, basically.
Yeah, totally. I think that's the kind of things that teams have to start considering, as potentially maybe even having someone, splitting the job in half, half detection engineer, half data engineer, or have a data engineer work with a detection engineer, because so much of that just goes hand in hand.
Yeah, totally. And like as the detection engineering field kind of grows more and more and becomes more prevalent, like you just said, that issue of, are you a data engineer, or are you a researcher, or are you a detection builder, kind of starts coming into question. And now this field, I bet, is going to have some branches within specializations.
Yeah. Sure. Increasingly, I'm seeing the threat hunters work with the detection engineers, the data engineers, create a life cycle, especially when you have a powerful analytics capability where you can run massive queries and really crunch that data to then build detection. So you feed that back, the threat hunter feeds that back to the detection engineer in order to just have overall improvement.
Oh, totally. And same with the analysts, working with the analysts to find out if there's a high false positive, to make sure you can tune that and work with them, because they're the ones that are feet on the ground kind of working with them all. So if they see something that's starting to pop up, we can work with them to better that detection and help their load.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's something I definitely like to see, is I think that having a repeatable workflow where you're using your analytics, so high false positives, to feed back to your detection engineer to reduce that better quality. But you need that workflow, because too often in TC teams, there's just one guy's handling it all, and it's just too much.
Totally agree.
All right, so you ready to go into your slides?
Yeah, for sure. Let's do it.
All right. By the way, I really appreciate you doing this. The best part of my day is talking to people like yourself, because we want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and thanks for having me on. This is fun. I've never done this before.
Hey, I hope you do it again. So tell me a story.
Yeah, so this is just a Cribble demo, and don't pay any attention to how well I designed this power slide. It's PowerPoint. It's my forte.
Hey, it's all good.
But yeah, so this is just kind of like a general idea of how you could do like enrichment on firewall traffic logs. I'm using Palo Alto as the demonstration. And I mean, really though, this applies to any logs that you can pull data from, normalize it, and then act on it. So those are, I don't know if everyone's familiar with the Cribble platform. This is one of the pipelines inside a pack. And so you can see this first step right here is just searching a raw regex for includes traffic. So we're grabbing all the traffic logs, and we're using this parser functionality, and we have the operation mode set to extract as a CSV. So since we know these logs are coming in as a CSV, we're able to point it to the source field that we want to extract from. And then we basically came up with this list of fields. These names are totally dynamic. And if you just Google Palo Alto traffic log syntax, it'll give you a write-up of all of them in the order they come in. So you can just pull that from their website and throw this in here. So what this does is the raw log field is now going to be extracted, and each one of these is going to be a high-level variable that we could reference in the Cribble platform.
Hey, Max, so can you go back one? So we got a question from the community asking about is this concept for all firewall logs or a specific firewall?
Yeah, so this this demo specifically right here, when it says like the field names and everything, that's specifically tailored to Palo Alto logs. That being said, FortiGate, Cisco, I mean, all these different ones are totally, the logic behind it applies. At the end of the day, as long as you're able to get the list of fields, extract them, the process and logic that goes behind this is going to work for any of them.
I think it's really well said. And I think it's really important that, and this goes part of that conversation, that with the time you can then take that data from multiple firewalls and boil that down, essentially normalize that data using exactly what Max is talking about. So I think that this is, a very, very powerful way to represent it.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, so we're pulling all the logs out. We're not giving it just one thing to note, I guess, because this took me a little to figure out of playing around in the platform. This destination field, if you put one, say like __, so using internal variable, like test would be a nested JSON underneath test. And just in my own testing and my own experience, it was easier for me to just leave it blank and pull them all to the high level fields so that they're easier to reference later on.
That's a great tip. Thank you.
Totally. And then you can see so that the first one I showed you is just this parser function, basically just grabbing the logs, getting it ready to go. And then you could see this is enrich IPs. So this one's, we're only looking at source IP for this demo. You can apply this to source, destination, anywhere there's an IP field that you can extract, you could use this.
So just one question. So tell me, so I see you're using Redis. And so what kind of, I mean, you don't have to say exactly what kind of threat intel are you using?
Yeah, so there's like a couple, I mean, just think about IP info providers, Gray Noise, Shodan, Spur, that's a big one that's just free to use and open. Basically anything that has an API that you can call and will return like the ASN, the IP info, if it's been noticed or observed to be malicious, or if it's observed to be a VPN, anything that can kind of help enrich that data, right?
I think that's a great idea, especially that goes back to your comment earlier about, okay, we're going to take a little data out, but we're going to put a little bit more data back in to improve the quality of the data.
Exactly. Yeah. Instead of making the analyst do that first step when they come in and say, okay, is this malicious? Let's look up the IP. That 30-second process manually just gets automated, and it makes everyone's life a little bit easier, especially with the boots on the ground.
Oh, absolutely. And so I assume you're taking an IP out of this, and then you're adding on fields based on results from the threat intel?
Yep, exactly. So I'll dive into these specific ones right now.
Sure.
So you can see this Redis call, right? As long as you set up a Redis server anywhere, however you set it up, as long as it's reachable, use authentication, follow best practices, all that fun stuff, right? Make sure it's secure. But what we're doing is real simple. So these IP info providers and threat intel providers, one way you could do it is you could set up like a script to automatically feed into that Redis database so you have it available at all times. You could also some of these places provide like zip files basically of a long list of all their threat intel that they have. So you could download that, bulk write it to Redis, whatever you want to do. For this example, the source IP is going to be used as the key. So for the key, we'll basically have it return like Intel provider and then the Intel provider's data, like the name and then the data behind it. So yeah, we're just doing an hget all source IP. And then that stores it in this Redis field so we can reference it later, right? So this next step.
One thing I want to mention for anyone who's unfamiliar is that you can also use CSVs as well in Cribble. So CSVs are a real simple way to add threat intel. It's very common, especially see it with CMDB data, for example. And Redis is another really good solution as well. Sorry about that, Max.
No, totally. I mean, yeah, the list in Cribble work as well. It's a matter of updating them when the new intel comes out. So yeah, whatever floats the boat and works. So yeah, after we get this Redis step, so now we have the data stored in Redis. This next field I have goes ahead and says if it's null at the high level first off, and then it also checks to make sure that the Redis the IP lookup name is not null. So if we know it's not null, that means it's returned data. If it was null, we just move on and there's nothing to do anymore. And you can see we're back into parser mode like that first step, and we're doing an extract on a JSON object. And then we pass in right here this source field. So Redis dot whatever you name your IP lookup provider. And so what that does is going to take out, that's the nested JSON. It's going to pull it out one level and put it at the top level, which allows us to manipulate it easier. You can save it. I didn't do a destination field for the same reason, so we could get it at that high level. The list of fields, it's not CSV, so the names are already there because it's key value. Fields to keep and fields to remove. You could remove stuff if you wanted it here. In this example, I just haven't yet. I do that at the end, but either way, whatever works. Step 4 right here. Sorry if it's a little hard to see. Is basically just an eval function, and it's just doing Redis dot the IP lookup, is making sure it's null again, or not null, and then we're basically pulling these out as you can see. So like the AS number was nested still as AS dot number, and we're pulling that into the top level variable so we can reference it easier later on. I was getting a little issues just trying to do it inside of the serialize function, so I just said let's do it this way, made it easy, got the job done, moved on. And then, yeah, as you can see, steps 5 and 6 are just a repeat of 3 and 4, but for your threat intel provider. So
just one question. So let's say you're adding these eval fields. Are you using that to build your detection? So essentially, or is that just more added data for your analysts?
Yeah, so this is more just kind of data manipulation right now. So yeah, I'm pulling these out so I can reference them later. But yes, these are going to be what are included in the new logs that I'm sending to the analyst that they're going to see. So this will
That's
all be
cool. So I'm interested, like the idea of risk. It seems like a way that you could then classify, what's the severity of the potential threat.
yeah, exactly. Like some providers will give like a score or like a
Mhm.
number, whatever they give kind of thing. Some of it's like JSON, nested JSON. So whatever works. But yeah, we just throw that in there just to have something flagged in case it's like a standout name or something like that, right?
Very cool.
But yeah, so 5 and 6 are just the same thing for threat intel provider. So different variable names, but same concept at the end of the day. So once we get past 5 and 6, and we're back on this IP lookup provider one, now we're serializing it. So we want to keep the data as JSON for the reason of saving even more on log storage. Since JSON is larger data struct, this makes it a lot easier. And then on our SIM side, we just set up custom rules to know which fields are equal to what fields. Since we're manipulating it, we know the exact format, so it's super easy to build out. But yeah,
one question: does that manipulation also help with your performance?
Yeah, it does, just because we're able to like shrink it so much more, right, and keep it compact. So like if it's a JSON, that's just going to be more over the wire. It's going to take longer. It's to process, more overhead computing power, all that stuff, compared to CSV where we just have these custom fields that says field 1 is this, field 2 is this,
Sure.
and that sort of thing.
It can make a big difference, especially field-driven detections versus having to write a regex and having to extract it on the fly in your SIM. So
regex can stay away from me. Yeah, no, yeah. It helps, yeah, because then it's all normalized again. So you have IP is going to be this field or whatever you want to say, right?
Hey, absolutely.
Yeah, but so yeah, so after like you could see the original JSON. If I went back to the first slide, everything before to the left of my mouse and above was already there, and you can see these IP info provider fields we added. So it'll have IP, AS number, AS org, etc. Good.
Nice, yeah. So I see them; they're highlighted in red, at the bottom.
Those are all the new fields that we're going to append to that CSV now, which are going to allow us to have more information, right, for the analysts. Step 8, is the same exact thing as 7, but for threat intel provider, right? I'm not showing the threat intel one just because it's redundant, but the idea and concepts are the exact same. And then steps 9 and 10 are also the exact same thing, except for the threat logs, right? And these threat logs, they just have a different like syntax. So you can see headers are the last one opposed to SCTP chunks received. So it's just the same thing, same concept. Again, conceptually, it's all the same, just a different execution.
Nice.
And then at the end of it, this is kind of hard to see. I apologize, but basically you could just see the finished CSV. This is unedited. It ends with that 0, and then here it ends with that 0. IP lookup, IP number, the ASN, the city, the state, the country. Again, it's a little hard to see, apologize, but that's basically just showing all those fields in real time that were actually processed from this.
Can you go back to the final result?
Yep.
I think one of the keys, though, for the audience is see how you have your fields are carefully defined. And this gives you that structure in the data to help you drive your detections. Plus, the actual raw event is smaller. So you're going to get smaller data, better data at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah. So the one step I didn't show in this is at the end of the pipeline, I would recommend deleting all these extra fields because now those don't really matter. You just want to send that raw along, right?
Right.
But as Ed just pointed out, yeah, these are all the fields that first function of parsing and extracting the CSV did. So it assigned all these JSON numbers. And then you could see the parser we did for like the Intel provider. There's AS number. All those things become high level variables so that referencing them and the serialized portion is a lot easier.
Yeah, it's going to be better performance. And it's also, I think the big thing is because it's field based, it's going to take less expertise if you hand this over to somebody else.
Yeah, the onboarding time is a lot easier. The learning curve is smaller because you just have your own taxonomy that you're running with, and that's what you run with.
Yeah, I've seen too frequently where just incredible, you see your detection is just this regex and this regex. You're doing the parsing in the detection, and it looks painful.
Yeah, totally.
Looks really, really painful, and that's also so that smaller data is especially because that helps you with your costs.
Exactly, smaller data can be quicker, cheaper. What's not to like?
So what do you see? When you get time to do even better, what do you think is going to be like the next phase? Maybe not for this type of data, but in general for your detections. What are you looking to do phase 2 and 3 as you get even better with managing your data and writing detections?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing next is kind of expanding, like just trying to get as many logs as you can that are actionable, and trying then to, it's honestly going to be a bigger data engineering push, I guess, in the future right now, trying to normalize across all of our like endpoints and fields and all the different SaaS application logs and all the craziness that is logging that is out there, and combining them into one SIM and basically being able to run detections from there. I mean, I know teams and have been on teams that have detections in all these different platforms all at once, and then it just becomes a little bit harder to manage. And so I'm a big proponent of like detection as code and automating everything that you can. So I kind of come from a DevOps background a little bit more. So I'm a big automation guy, and if I don't have to do things twice, I'll build the automation for it because it makes my life easier. And I feel like that kind of just comes into everything. So I would say the biggest step is kind of building a pipeline for detections. That would be something I would really like to do and see out there. I mean, I know they're out there, but just like automation for checking your false positive rate or just your hit rate, getting it into deployments, running unit tests, all that type of stuff. I think that would be a really fun project to spend some time on.
Well, I think especially as you mentioned before, automation, being able to, because you got to free up your time somehow. And so, I mean, automation is the only way to do it. And I mean, what you're talking about, it's the way forward. It's the path to future success.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, like we get more and more automation is the only way to stay afloat. Like you said. Yep.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, especially in security, the stress on teams is significant, and staffing is, I just don't see it getting any better. And so that's why I think you gotta free up the time, and I encourage leaders who are watching something like this to, please focus on automation, free up the time. It's not just better quality, but it saves your staff. And I think it's crucial.
Totally. Yep. Anything to help from alert fatigue on the analysts, especially on smaller teams, even bigger teams. I mean, alert fatigue is real. Like,
right.
You got to help that as much as you can.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important to be proactive, where you have established patterns of development of data, of detection engineering, threat hunt, feeding data back to your detection engineers, being able to look at statistics of false positives, because I think that's valuable feedback, and that helps you. It always helps you get better.
Oh, totally. I mean, having that circle within the team of all the different places coming together, I mean, that's necessary.
So we got another question here. So where did you set up your Redis instance?
Yeah, so you can set them up anywhere. I mean, any VM hosting provider, Azure, AWS, whatever you want. EC2s are an easy one to do, right? You can just deploy it, set it up, like set up the instance manually. You could use one of the pre-deployed like packages that they have to deploy it for you, or serverless. I mean, there's a plethora of options, but yeah, I mean, I personally opt for cloud VM setups and then manually setting up the instance. I feel it gives you more control, and that's how I've done it. And it hasn't wronged me, so I run with that.
So I'm gonna give a little bit of architectural context. One thing that's important with Redis is that it's adjacent to the worker groups that are using it. You don't want to have Redis in one region and have your worker group in another, because if you're having issues with latency, you got to remember Cribble is querying latency at the speed of your data. So 40, 50, 60,000 events per second, that you can't afford a whole lot of latency. And so it's important, though, that your Redis instance needs to be fairly adjacent to the worker group that's using it. That's the one thing I want to emphasize.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, latency is everything with that. It needs to be quick.
Yeah, totally. And so those are just big things to kind of think of. But absolutely, I mean, because there's definitely a lot of options for Redis. But also, if you're not comfortable with Redis, you also have the options of using CSV. Look in the Cribble knowledge library. And so there's a lot of options of managing getting CSVs to your worker groups and doing that as well. Another thing I want to mention also with threat intel is, again, just going back to that theme, the data has to be adjacent because it's all in real time. So trying to do a lookup against an API provider threat intel, that's not going to fly. You look at threat intel provider is not going to like 100,000 API queries per second. And so that's something they're not going to, but as long as you can get the data to the worker group, either by a file based, also we have like MaxMind that's using a binary database for GeoIP lookup, another really, really solid solution.
Yeah, totally. That's the bulk writing into Redis. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't point that out. You definitely don't want to be spamming them with API requests for each time. You want to get that in a database from a text file or something like that for sure.
Yeah, the common pattern, like for Shodan or Redis, for example, that you use a script to pull that data into your Redis database, and then you're constantly refreshing your Redis database, and then Cribble is querying your Redis database for updates.
Yep, exactly. That's the way to do it.
Very, very cool. All right, we're coming to time. So, do you got any other things you want to talk about? Anything else you want to just, anything else, what's on your mind?
No, yeah, I mean, I think I'm all good over here. I mean, this field I've been in, I'm kind of newer to the professional side, but I love it and I love the community. So I was happy to do this, and I just hope to continue to see other like defense purple team minded like start sharing more, and hope to grow this side of the field, because red team's sexy. I mean, that's where we all started and I started, and it's fun, but this is where the more impact is, and you get to see more come through. So I love this side of it and happy to share.
Hey, really appreciate it. Hope you'll come back soon. So, just a little bit about Cribble, please. If you join the Cribble community at community.cribble.io or cribble.io/community, join the Slack channel, over 5,000 strong. Also, check out the sandboxes at sandbox.cribble.io. Get your hands on the product, check out what you want, and just check out what you need to do. Get your hand in. So, just see if the product meets your needs. We're here to talk, we're here to engage, but really appreciate everyone being here today. And Max, most of all, thank you, and hope you'll come back soon.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for watching.
Yep. Thank you.